Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I am so excited about the show today. And I am so grateful that I do this show and that I can bring to you wonderful resources to help you and your family have a better life. And I'm so happy to have with me today Greg Barnsdale, and I'm going to tell you about Greg. Greg is phenomenal. He is a death doula, and I never met a male death doula, so I'm going to have to talk about that. He is a certified financial planner and certified executor. He has written a book called Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. He is a speaker. He is an unusual undertaker. And Greg even faced his own immortality with a large brain tumor diagnosis after this book was written. Greg is very passionate about helping others, about opening up these conversations that we must have to talk about our wishes, our end-of-life planning. And, folks, that's not being morbid. That's being realistic. And we need to have these conversations, and I do have them on Chatting with Betsy, because if you've listened to me, you know I pop open the taboo. I will pop that cover open, and we will talk about it. And I want to welcome Greg Barnsdale to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. I can't read my own handwriting, Greg. Let me say the complete title of your book. Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, Practical Advice from a Funeral and Financial Insider. And Greg will also give his website, but I really want to say I highly recommend going on the website, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality.com, because it's phenomenal. And Greg, I want to thank you, first of all, for connecting with me on LinkedIn and writing your book and your passion to help people to plan. And I'm sure you saw a lot of different situations in your field and your career over the years. What motivated you to write this book? We'll get started with that.
Well, Betsy, it was primarily frustration, to be honest with you. And this book took me many years to pull together. But it was the frustration that I had seen working both as a funeral director and a certified financial planner as I was helping people discuss end-of-life issues in both fields. And to a large degree, people just didn't want to talk about these things. But I knew I had seen so many situations of people that had died and were proactive before they died, and the situation was just so much better for the survivors.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. It's hard, folks, and I'll be, you guys know I'm a Jersey girl, and 6 years ago already, I went down to plan my husband's funeral. I felt guilty about that, Greg. I felt guilty that I was doing it because I didn't tell him. I wasn't going to tell him about it. I want to get him upset. And I cried on the way to the funeral home, cried at the funeral home, and cried all the way home. But it was necessary, and I'm glad I did it. And then like a year before that, I went down to the cemetery and started to make payments on the burial site, which I'm glad I did, because a year later, a little more than a year later, Matt died. And that was a relief having that done.
I'm sure, Betsy, and I'm sorry to hear for what you had to go through, but you're exactly right. These tough conversations and proactivity steps that we can take in advance can make such a big difference when they're needed. But as I have stressed to people for years, the time to have these conversations about end-of-life issues is when minds are clear and time is plentiful.
Absolutely. I agree. I wish I could hug you in person, Greg, because it is so true. And I was talking to Greg before we recorded. I just want to tell the audience this. Yesterday was the first time I ever saw in a local newspaper conversations about planning end of life, how to have those conversations. So I'm glad the public is finally catching on. I've been talking about this for 6 years since I've been on Passionate World Talk Radio, but we need to have these conversations. And your book does help start those conversations, doesn't it, Greg?
It does, yes. And my book it's a short read, Betsy. People can read it easily in one sitting, and it's really just meant as a conversation starter from someone who, as you know, is passionate about this type of theme as well, both from a funeral director and a financial advisor point of view. And the feedback that I'm getting from this book that I've published, it's my first one. I didn't really think of myself as an author at all, but I guess I've written a pretty good book because the feedback I'm getting is all very positive. It's inspiring people to pull out their will and read it and talk to their family.
Very important book to have and to read, and I'll tell you what, to give it as a gift. If you know a caregiver, if you know someone who is terminal, maybe they don't have their end-of-life wishes done yet, I would give it to them. I would buy this for everyone, and I'll tell you, my son is, well, now he's 40, but I wanted Josh to have a will done and get power of attorney. Josh isn't married. And I was thinking, especially during COVID, God forbid Josh would have gotten COVID. He didn't have a will. I wanted to get it done before, but then COVID happened. Then I had to wait until the lawyer's office opened. And as soon as they reopened, we went down there. And I had Josh do his will. Now, I heard someone on a New York channel, Greg, say that when your child leaves for college or when they're 18, or even if they live at home, they should have a will. That could always be changed, folks. Can always be changed. But, you know, when your child is 18 here in the U.S., you don't have a say in the matter of what goes on because they're legally an adult. That's something to think about.
Yes, I agree, Betsy. It does certainly make sense to do that. And also from a medical directive, power of attorney point of view as well, so that anybody's health situation can change, as you know, very, very quickly. And knowing what the person would have wanted, how they would have wanted been treated or what they wanted done with their body after a death is so helpful to know in advance, because trying to discuss these things when somebody's in a hospital bed is not the time to be doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the article. You just sent it to me this morning, and it was about the huddle outside the hospital room. You know, when people were talking about, I guess, what the person would want, what kind of burial. That should have been done way ahead of time. Folks, I'm going to tell you this. It's a gift, okay? It's a gift when you plan ahead. And as I said before in the show, and I will say it again, we plan when we what we want to do in our career. We plan if we want to have children, if we want to get married or not. Well, why can't we plan how we want the end of our life to look like and what we want for our funeral or memorial service, whatever you want to call it, and where we want to be buried? Do we want cremation? Do we want the environmental green burial that they're having now, or, you know, your traditional? It's so important. And what kind of funeral service? You know, it's not just planning the end of life medically. It's what kind of memorial service do you want? Do you want a service? Do do not want a service. You know, Greg, I'm sure you probably heard of this. Some people had their funeral when they were still alive.
Yes,
which I think
I am hearing that occasionally, and it's such a great creative idea.
It is. And I said, well, that is kind of awesome. People might think it's a little strange, but that way the person can enjoy hearing what people say about them. I just think that I think that's a cool idea. I have always, like you, Greg, have been fascinated with dying since I was a child. I was always fascinated with that process, and it is really a relief to know what a person's wishes are medically. And especially, during the pandemic time, I'm sure a lot of people didn't have living wills. And once they put you on that ventilator, it's hard to get off, from what I heard. And, you don't want the state coming in for your medical care. Now, that's why I was thinking, I really got to get just to a lawyer, because God forbid if you were to have been in a car accident or had gotten COVID, I didn't have any legal say. And when Matt was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, we went to a lawyer immediately. And I got the POA, I had gotten the living will, the medical directive, and I'm glad I did. And people don't understand, Greg, and I'm sure it's in Canada too, Greg is from Canada, that especially with dealing with government agencies, our Medicare here in the United States, Social Security, you need that power of attorney. If you want to talk to people about pension, getting it into your name, you have to have that power of attorney. Life insurance, they won't talk to you. You have to have that power of attorney at financial affairs.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right, Betsy. And that's, again, something I stress in my book as well, is that there are all kinds of people out there that can help us with these things properly, because there are different rules in the various jurisdictions, the various states across the U.S., and the different provinces and territories of Canada, and various parts of the world too. The rules vary, at least to some degree. But another point that I want to bring up during our interview here is the fact that there are more and more options now for planning online, and there are cautions with that. And again, that's something I stressed in my book, especially about preparing wills online.
Yes. I've heard of that, Greg. Is that, I heard you could get just like a basic will.
Yes. Yes.
Do you recommend that, or do you recommend going physically to a lawyer's office and financial planner?
Well, everybody's situation is so different, but let me start my comment by saying that regardless of the size of one's bank account, we still need to let our family know what we want to have happen with our body, as an example.
Absolutely.
So whether we have a high net worth as a business owner or executive, or we own very little, our family should still, as an example, know what we want done with our body, as you had mentioned earlier. But the fact that these sorts of things need to be known in advance and properly planning for them is vitally important. As an example, here in Canada and right across the country, and I'm sure right across the States and in many other countries, there are a large number of online will platforms being made available. But if someone is paying child support or spousal support, or they own part of a business, or they own land outside of the jurisdiction where they live, they should be seeing a lawyer and not relying on these basic types of online will platforms.
Oh, I agree. And especially if you have a child, an adult child who has special needs, and you want to have a trust, I would highly recommend going to a lawyer. I think I'm just like so particular myself, Greg, that I just went to a lawyer because I just wanted to talk to someone, and I'm really not tech savvy to go online. I don't have a computer and a printer, so I prefer to go in person. I heard one of my guests said that it's best to have a team. You go to a financial planner and a lawyer. Do you also recommend that?
I do, yes, because a lawyer will provide excellent legal advice, especially if they're well versed in estate planning and the jurisdictional rules of the area where they work, which I'm sure they all are. But a financial planner brings a different mindset, a different set of values to the table to help with tax strategies and beneficiary designations and all those sorts of things that pertain to the financial world, which certainly dovetails with the legal world, but even also in some cases involving an accountant can make sense too.
Yes, and I just think it's very important too, Greg, and I'm sure you probably have this in your book, to pick people who will honor and respect your wishes, even if they don't agree with it. They don't have to agree with it, but as long as they honor and respect your wishes. And sometimes that's not necessarily your children. Sometimes children have a very difficult time with that.
Yes, yep. That's great advice, Betsy. I firmly agree with you. And also another point that relates to this is that many people will just simply nominate their 2 or 3 or 4 children equally as executors of their estate, and that may not be a good idea either. Quite often, siblings don't get along during good times, and after a death, people can change, especially when matters pertain to money.
Very true. Oh, that is true. So true. If it's not written down, it's, people will say, oh, well, mom or dad promised me this. Well, it's not written down anywhere. Or as I'm sure you've seen, Greg, what their moms or dads or laying in the hospital. Oh, did they want life support? Yes, they did. No, they didn't. And they bicker back and forth, and families argue and get mad with each other because they can't agree on what to do.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And that's why these conversations are so vital to have when minds are clear and time is plentiful.
Yes. I have to tell the audience, because since I did experience this myself, all I had to do when my husband died was he was died up in a hospice unit in a hospital. They just called the funeral home. Everything was done. All I had to do was go down and make another payment and sign the paper, whatever papers I had to sign. And it took that stress away from me at that time. And I can't even picture, Greg, that someone's dying and you have to scramble to find a funeral home, find a cemetery, if that's what you wish, to be buried, or even find a place for cremation, like in a matter of days. I can't even picture that. I just can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if someone dies, I'll go ahead.
When we plan weddings months, possibly a year more in advance, yeah. and planning a funeral is typically done in a very, very short period of time. But there's also the trend as well, Betsy, that more and more people are not wanting a traditional funeral either.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. A lot of people have memorial service, celebration of life, or I had graveside service. Some people, it's whatever they choose, or what music they want, or who they want to speak, to make it more personal. which in my opinion, I've been at funerals where relatives speak. I think it's so much more personal with my own family, with my mom and dad and my brother. They don't want anyone else to speak but the rabbi. And I just thought it was so impersonal. Well, that might sound terrible, but I would have liked to have said something. But that's not what they wanted. Or to have music, just to make it, just to give that personal edge. With Matt, I know he loved Johnny Cash, and so I played a Johnny Cash song. He liked In the Garden. And so I played Johnny Cash singing In the Garden because that's what he told me.
Yes. Yeah, and that type of personal touch can mean so much.
Yes. And I had friends who spoke about Matt. And you know what? That means so much, Greg. Yeah, I have to tell you, folks, from my own personal opinion, whatever you do, do your thing. I'm not here to judge. But just to have that personal touch of a friend talking and not some stranger who never met my relatives, but to have that personal connection at a funeral is just somewhere heart-touching and comforting to those who are grieving. That's my opinion, because I've seen both, and it's just so impersonal. When the rabbis picked from a funeral home, he didn't know my parents, he didn't know my brother. It was impersonal, and I just think that personal touch is very comforting to friends and family.
Yes, I totally agree with you with what I've experienced too. And that leads back or circles back to this whole point about letting our family know our wishes, because there is so many decisions that can be made in advance that make it so much easier, as we've both said earlier, about leaving our loved ones in a position of strength at such a tumultuous time. But many of the decisions about making it personal can be made in advance too, such as music, etc.
Exactly. Greg, I have to ask you this because I never met a male death doula. How did you get into that? And I'm glad that I wish there were more. I wish there were more death doulas. I wish there was death doulas around when Matt needed one, when I needed one. How did you become a death doula?
Well, I've for years I've always wanted to become a hospice volunteer. And not too long ago, I went through the full training and became a fully qualified hospice volunteer, and I've acted as a volunteer and really enjoyed it. And I've known for some time that I probably would enjoy it, and although it's not for everyone, but there's such a need for this, and the whole hospice movement is growing, just like this whole death positive movement that you and I are basically discussing here, Betsy. But their mandate is that no one should die alone. And I think that's so powerful.
Yes. Oh, yes. That to have a death doula, and this is one of the reasons why I do my show, is for people to know about resources that I wish I knew about. I interviewed a death doula who lived, would you believe, Greg, the next town over from me, but I did not know of her. Until I interviewed her, which was like probably a year ago, maybe 2 years now, and I could have hired her. So we don't know about resources in our own backyard sometimes, and this is why, folks, when you hear the passion in my voice, because it's real, I'm passionate about you all knowing resources that can help you, because I wish I knew about them at the time. And I just, we're here to help you, and that's wonderful. And I have to ask you also, Greg, if you don't mind, you were diagnosed with a large brain tumor, and you faced your own mortality. Are you okay now?
I am, yes. And fortunately, the large brain tumor that I was diagnosed with 2 months after I published the book, ironically, was non-cancerous, and I've since had it removed, and I feel like I've been shot at and missed.
Wow. I'm glad it wasn't cancerous. That's and that you're okay. But that probably had you thinking, right? Oh, I'm glad I got my. I'm glad I have my my paperwork in order, my ducks in a row. I was thinking, even if someone dies suddenly, has a heart attack or gets killed for whatever reason unexpectedly or dies unexpectedly, that you have this in place. Nobody knows when we're going to die, folks, but we're all going to die. That's a fact. And
yes,
go ahead.
I fully agree with you, Betsy, and that's a great part of my message too, is that life is incredibly delicate, and we don't know typically when something's going to happen. We're far better off to have these conversations and plan for it, because we know at some point it is going to happen.
Absolutely. And you talked about the death positive movement. Where did that originate from, or is that like just a saying, or is there actually a movement that people can go to online?
I'm finding, Betsy, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier, that LinkedIn is such a great platform. I've created a rather compelling profile for myself, but I'm reaching out to a number of people from the financial, legal, end of life, and faith community and the financial community too about this message of mine. And I just heard it from one of them. I used to call it the death awareness movement. And then one of them had mentioned to me that he had heard it phrased as a death positive movement, but it's all the same thing. It's just embracing this as you had mentioned your newspaper included yesterday.
Oh, I like that. I like the sound of that death positive movement. I think sometimes my audience might think I'm a little morbid, but I'm not morbid. I'm just based in reality, and I just think that we should be prepared, and we need to have these conversations. I know my mom, she did not want to have the conversation of, when she couldn't take care of herself, where she wanted to be. She was determined to stay in her house, and God bless her, she was able to until she was 91. And then she had to be placed in assisted living for, safety reasons. It wasn't safe for her to be alone anymore. And, think of your end of life, folks. What do you want? Do you want a feeding tube? Not want a feeding tube? Life support? These are important questions. Financial. Right, Greg? Do you want to give money to charity? Who do you want to give your money to? Not everyone wants to give money to their children or their relatives. Jewelry. Who do you want to have your jewelry? That is, and have it in writing. Folks, please put it in writing so people don't fight over it. And they do. And I'm sure you probably have a lot of stories about that, Greg.
Well, yes, these proactive conversations can help eliminate, at least to the best degree possible, these types of potential conflicts after a sudden change in health or after a death. Absolutely.
Definitely. And if you have homes, property, you need to get that all squared away. Now, I don't know if it's the same in Canada as here in the U.S., but about when someone dies, if they have a will, Greg, I get confused with this. Do they have to go to a probate court even if they have a will, or is that if they don't have one?
Well, my understanding is, and I certainly don't know it all, I'm learning continually as well, but I do find it fascinating. But regardless of the jurisdiction, typically a court office where one used to live is involved in the estate settlement process. If there is a will, the court or the judge basically goes by that will, and the person named within it to settle the estate is the executor, or sometimes called the estate trustee. But if there is no will in place, no valid will in place, a court office is still involved, and they typically will appoint an administrator, and someone from the family may step up to be that administrator. But then you've got the court involved, and as you mentioned earlier, anytime we can keep the government out of our affairs, that's better for everybody's peace of mind.
Yes, I have to share this. I thought that when I went to a lawyer with Matt, that he wrote out a will. I have my will, but he didn't do a will. And I was shocked because I thought he did. But thankfully, he didn't have any property. Everything was in my name. So I didn't have to go through, the probate or courts or anything because he didn't have anything. But I was stunned. So, folks, take a word of advice from me. Thankfully, Matt didn't have any property or anything. Make sure you do a will when you go to a lawyer for your power of attorneys. Make sure you do the will. Don't be like me, think that you did it. You didn't, because I was shocked that I didn't have it. So
yes. And any time, Betsy, that we can avoid those types of surprises, especially at the highly emotional time of a significant change in health or a death, we're best off to have these things planned out and discussed openly in advance.
Absolutely. And folks, I know it's a touchy subject. And I know if your parents are from like my generation of parents, World War II generation, they don't want to discuss that. Those things were not discussed back then. But we need to have these conversations. Matter of fact, I had mentioned, my sister mentioned that her friend had died, and my brother said that, he has the power of attorney, and he has different people's wills. And my sister said, oh, I don't have a will. And I said, well, you better get one ASAP. You and your husband better get wills done. And my sister's going to be 69 years old and doesn't have a will. I felt like saying, what are you waiting for? It's really so important, Greg. What would you like people to take away from your book? What would you like the readers to take away?
Yes. I've come up with a couple of free, easy-to-access resources that will help people understand this. And on my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com, under the resources page, they will find what is called a Living Legacy quiz. And that short 5-question quiz, as people go through it, most people will realize that they have some work to do to become better organized. And it's just a great inspirational tool that anyone can access free that will help them learn about these things. And one of them is the risk that executors face now, which is a much higher risk than ever before. They can actually be sued if they mess up. But another important resource is a list of my 30 top questions to help these types of conversations happen more frequently with our loved ones, because again, people don't want to talk about it, but I call them probing legacy questions, and there are 15 basic ones and plus 15 more advanced ones to help people get these conversations started easier.
And I went on your website and I read that, Greg. Excellent. Folks, if you don't take advantage of that, I really don't know. I'm at a loss as to what to tell you. Greg Barnsdale is an excellent resource, and what he has on his website, really, I would hop on there right after you hear this interview and go look at it and to order his book. Where can people find your book, Greg?
The easiest place to find it, Betsy, is through my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com. And there are all kinds of links as people click pretty well on any page that will take them to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and it's also available in ebook and audiobook format too.
Oh, that is great. Well, thank you, Greg, for coming on today. I so enjoyed talking to you. And how can people connect with you? Your website, I know, is one of them. Any other way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, the website is the easiest, or that I'm on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, all those things as well. My email address is greg@donotignoreyourmortality.com. So I welcome any inquiries at all. I'm just looking to elevate this message to help more people.
Well, I thank you for doing so, Greg. Excellent. I really so enjoyed talking to you. And I know you have a passion to help others, and I thank you for writing your book and for coming on today. Folks, you heard Greg Barnsdale and his book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, Practical Advice from a Funeral and Financial Insider. Now, let me tell you, that isn't an expert. I don't know who isn't, right? I mean, what phenomenal guest you are, Greg. Thank you so much. I'm so glad. Again, thanks for connecting with me. It is so great to connect with like-minded people. And for all the information about Greg Barnsdale will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who's the station director, station manager, writes. And she produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. And thank you for listening and sharing and subscribing. Folks, please tell your friends about this show. Share the show. I'm here to help people. I want to help as many people as possible. And I can only do it if you share the show. And when we have information that's valuable, that can help someone, and we keep it a secret, it's being selfish as far as I'm concerned. And yes, I'm a Jersey girl, and I tell it like it is, but share the knowledge and help others. That's what I'm here for. I've been called to serve, and I'm here to help other people, and that's why I'm so passionate about telling people about resources, because I want people to know about information that can help them have a better life, because I wish I knew about resources. I wish somebody was there to throw me a lifeline, and now I want to throw other people a lifeline. I want them to know that they're not alone in navigating the caregiving waters of the process of dying situation. There are resources. And if you go on PassionWorldTalkRadioNetwork.com, you will see resources that can help you. And I just want to thank everyone. And Chatting with Betsy is for free on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, and Amazon Music, to name a few. And I always say at the end of my show, you could follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And as I always say at the end of my show, my saying, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever before. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy, on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Chat with you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.